We have some breaking news. Upset alert in college basketball with just 4 minutes left to go. Kansas State up 11. Coleman Hawkins with the dagger to extend their lead to 14, and down goes number 3, Iowa State at home. Kansas State pulls off the upset. The Wildcats just walked all over Iowa State. They actually entered this game a 16.5-point underdog and shocked many by pulling this one off. There's a look at your final score, 80-61. All right, for more on this crazy, absolute thriller of a game and wild upset for Kansas State, let's go ahead and say hello to our own BJ Taylor. What first was working so well for the Wildcats?
Well, first off, they came out and they actually did to Iowa State what Iowa State likes to do to other teams. They forced Iowa State to turn the basketball over, something Iowa State has started to struggle with since the beginning of conference play. TJ Otzelberger's team came into Big 12 play, leading the country in turning the opposing team over and making sure they didn't turn the ball over themselves. That has not been the case for their group since the start of the new year. They are now turning the ball over at around a 13-time-per-game rate. They were nearly a single-digit turnover team to start the season. And Kansas State took advantage of that today. Once they turned the ball over, they were able to turn defense into offense and get their guys going, like Coleman Hawkins in the front court, the Illinois transfer. All 5 starters today for the Kansas State Wildcats were in double figures. The most complete game Jerome Tang's group has been able to put together all season long. Again, a disappointing season for Iowa State for the most part, but this is really a bright spot for them as they move forward.
You know, it wasn't like Kansas State, though, wasn't giving Iowa State opportunities to get back in this one. It was just not the same Iowa State team that we've seen all season. Offensively, almost looked a little bit lost, but what else went wrong?
Well, Keyshawn Gilbert, the leader offensively for the Iowa State Cyclones, him along with Curtis Jones. Keyshawn Gilbert just couldn't get it going today. Only 8 points, 8 points to go along with 3 assists. He's the guy who they've leaned on in the biggest moments to be the consistent offensive player, and he just couldn't get it done. Give Kansas State's defense a lot of credit. They did a great job of having an awareness on him. They did a nice job of pressuring the basketball. But if you're Iowa State, you have got to make sure you get Keyshawn Gilbert going, and this is where they are missing the services of their star forward, Milan Momcilovic, a guy who has not been talked about a lot, but he went out with an injury about 4 or 5 games ago, and it's been a void for Iowa State. They've been able to patch and put a Band-Aid over that wound for a little while, but now back-to-back losses here in conference play, first against Arizona, now today against Kansas State. The absence of, Milan Momcilovic is starting to rear its ugly head a little bit for the Cyclones. That's something they're going to have to fix, and they're going to have to pray that he gets healthy sometime soon.
Most definitely. Okay, I want you to take us inside the mind of a player. You've been there before. Mentally, how do you bounce back? How do you get back on track? What are you prioritizing really at practice? Before you just saw the schedule, they see Kansas on the road on Monday.
The biggest thing from a psychology and the mentality standpoint is they have got to get in that locker room and get around each other. Taman Lipsey, the veteran leaders, Keyshawn Gilbert, and say, hey, look, we got to get back to the fundamentals and the simple things that made us a successful basketball team early on, right? Sometimes the game isn't that complicated, but as the conference play starts to move on, these games start to drag a little bit. It's literally one of the hardest parts of the season because you're literally right at the middle of conference play. You're still, 9 or 10 games away from even conference tournament, winning a championship, making a run into March Madness. You cannot allow the morale of your team to drop. If you're a leader in that locker room, a Keyshawn Gilbert, a Taman Lipsey, right, Curtis Jones, even though he's one of their younger players, they have got to step up and say, hey, guys, look, I know it's tough. I know these conference games are starting to become a bit of like I said, a drag. We have got to make sure we are locked in on the fundamentals and the principles that have made them successful throughout the season, because you don't want to have played your best basketball in November and December. You want to play your best basketball in February and March, and that is the message that those senior leaders and some of those veteran leaders in that locker room are really going to employ with the rest of the group.
We'll see if they can get back to the basics and those fundamentals before really Monday and when they see Kansas. We have to give more praise to Kansas State here. I do want to harp a little bit more on them because, as we know, This Wildcats team came into this season some high expectations, has since really fallen a little bit short here. But how good does it feel to actually get this win, and how can they use this win to build upon?
It's awesome for your Jerome Tang's group. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that they were a group that made essentially a Cinderella run into the Final Four, and we remember that video of Jerome Tang in front of the locker room dancing to the Lil Baby song. The team was fired up. Everybody that was a Kansas State fan was behind them, and that seems like it was 10 years ago, not 2 or 3 years ago, right? If you're Kansas State, this is awesome. You know, you feel good for a guy like Coleman Hawkins, who was an Illinois transfer, who has really been raked through the coals the majority of this season because he was one of the highest paid players in transfer portal free agency, receiving over $2 million allegedly, right? We never know what these numbers exactly are, but that's what everyone was saying. You feel good for a guy like him to play well today and knock off a team like Iowa State. Hopefully for this group, they can build some momentum in February, right? They still have a lot of work to do to push themselves back up into being in that middle of the pack, top third of the Big 12. But nevertheless, always good to go on the road and knock off who many consider to be the best team in the Big 12.
Most definitely, as they stand before this game.
Right.
But now, with Arizona State winning today against their rival in Arizona, they should now move atop of those Big 12 rankings. As for Iowa State, they entered this game the third-ranked team in the nation. How far do you expect them to fall?
Well, they're only going to drop to about 4th or 5th in the Big 12 standings, right? So they're still in a position to make a push. The biggest challenge that Iowa State has facing them is it doesn't get any easier, Jordan. Their next game is on the road at number 11 Kansas, right? As we know, it's never easy to go into Allen Fieldhouse and win in Lawrence. That goes without saying. And they also have a matchup at Houston, who now looks like they are the top dog in the Big 12 again and may have a chance to still reclaim their conference championship from a season ago. They're still undefeated in league play, so the schedule is not getting any easier for the Cyclones. If you're this group, this is not the time of year where you want to start to slide. You're hoping this wakes this team up, reinvigorates them to push forward and find the things that they were doing to be successful earlier in the season, because if not, the Big 12 will be unforgiving.
Most definitely, as one of the most incredibly difficult conferences in this season. You know, we'll see if they can get back to the basics, those fundamentals. As you mentioned, Iowa State falls in a huge upset to Kansas State. As you take a look at their upcoming schedule, none of these opponents you want to overlook, especially that next one Monday on the road against number 11 Kansas.